Welcome, audience, to our presentation about fiscal policy. My partner, Ryan, and I will be explaining what fiscal policy is, all of the components of fiscal policy, how to graph fiscal policy, and finally, its advantages and disadvantages. Enjoy our presentation. As we said, our project is all about fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the means which a government adjusts its spending levels and tax rates to monitor and influence a nation's economy. Adjusting government spending and tax rates either coincides with expansionary or contractionary fiscal policy, which we will discuss later in the presentation.
The long-run aggregate supply is a vertical line representing the relationship between price level and output in the long run. The United States is located at 5% unemployment, also known as full employment. It can only be moved through a large, long-lasting change in supply, such as through globalization or through massive new sources of energy or technology. The short-run aggregate supply curve displays the quantity of output supplied at different prices in an economy. The curve is upward sloping due to sticky wages and prices, with nominal wages and prices slow to adjust in the short run with rising costs of business. Here, an upward pressure is placed on prices. The aggregate demand curve displays the total demand for final goods and services. The curve is downward sloping due to three effects. The interest rate effect states that as price level decreases, the demand for money decreases as well as interest rates, causing investment to increase. The real balance effect states that as price level decreases, cash balances and consumption increase. Net export effect states that as price level and imports decrease, net exports increase.
A recession, by definition, is a period of temporary economic decline during which trade and industrial activity are reduced, generally identified by a fall in GDP in two successive quarters. Thus, when graphing a recession, you graph the LRAS first, then SRAS, and then AD, shifted to the left to represent the recession, which results in a low price level and a decrease in GDP. One way to fix a recession is by increasing government spending, which is one of the two options that can be used to move AD back to the right by increasing consumer spending and investment spending. This shift causes an increase in price level and output. The exact change in GDP could be calculated by multiplying the value of the policy by 1 over MPS.
Another manner of fixing a recession would be to decrease taxes. The effect of decreasing taxes would be to give the general public more money, which could be used to buy goods or for businesses to invest. This in turn would increase consumption and investment, thereby increasing the aggregate demand, increasing the price level and lowering unemployment. The exact change to GDP can be calculated by multiplying the value of the policy by negative MPC over MPS. Crowding out is when expansionary fiscal policy with deficit spending creates high interest rates. In turn, through the Barrow-Ricardo effect, this crowding out causes expansionary fiscal policy to not raise aggregate demand as much as expected, because the increased interest rates lower consumption spending and private investment spending. This can be counteracted with expansionary monetary policy.
And inflation causes an increased price level and output. This is another scenario where AD is graphed last because it is line shifting. In the case of an inflation, it is shifting to the right. And inflation, by definition, is when the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising and subsequently purchasing power is falling.
One way to fix inflation would be to decrease government spending. This would directly decrease the government spending component of aggregate demand and thereby decrease it, in turn decreasing the price level and increasing unemployment. Again, the change to GDP is calculated by multiplying the value of the policy by 1 over MPS.
The graph shown on the slide demonstrates that increasing taxes is one of the ways to combat inflation. By increasing taxes, consumer spending and investment spending decrease, therefore shifting AD back to the left, lowering the price levels and decreasing output. The amount of decrease in GDP can be calculated by multiplying the value of the policy by negative MPC over MPS.
Crowding in works in the opposite manner as crowding out. Crowding in is when contractionary fiscal policy lowers interest rates. In turn, these lower interest rates encourage consumer spending and private investment spending, thereby not allowing aggregate demand to decrease as much as was expected. This can be counteracted with contractionary monetary policy, which raises interest rates. Stagflation is unlike a recession or inflation in that it deals not with the change in aggregate demand, but rather in the short-run aggregate supply. Specifically, the short-run aggregate supply decreases, causing both high prices and high unemployment, a double whammy.
There is no easy fix for stagflation. The expansionary solution would entail increasing AD by decreasing taxes and/or increasing government spending to stimulate the economy. This would cause an increase in price levels but would lower the unemployment rate. Fixing stagflation is a classic example of how people face trade-offs, high price levels for lower unemployment. The contractionary solution tends to be less popular for the reasons stated on the previous slide. However, if this is the approach chosen, AD would shift to the left by increasing taxes and/or decreasing government spending, which would result in lower price levels but a higher level of unemployment.
The balanced budget multiplier is simply 1. That means that when the government increases both government spending and taxes by the same amount, the increase in GDP will be exactly equal to the value of the policy. This would also hold true for a decrease in GDP when both government spending and taxes are decreased. This is due to the government spending multiplier being more effective than the tax multiplier.
Fiscal policy is based on the theories of British economist John Keynes. His theory is that governments can influence macroeconomic productivity levels by either increasing or decreasing tax levels and public spending. However, Hayek believes that markets are highly organic and any interference with the natural spontaneity of the free market would distort its efficient operation.
Automatic stabilizers are programs put in place to offset fluctuations in real GDP without government intervention. These include the graduated income tax system, unemployment compensation, and stock and bond returns, which all help to limit the amount of times the government must use fiscal policy to counteract changes in real GDP in the economy.
Finally, now that we've fully explained what fiscal policy is, how it works, and its significance, we can compare its advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages include short outside lag and its immediate impact on national income and therefore the economy. However, some disadvantages are that there's an element of inflexibility, there's a long inside lag, and sometimes fixing one thing just worsens another.